A few years back, I was really into caving, or to give it to a stupid name that no one uses anymore. Spelunking. I really didn't think I'd be into it when I first tried it. Like I'd have considered myself mildly claustrophobic. The kind of guy who always felt a little anxious, zipping a sleeping bag up all the way. I don't know whether it just woke something up in me, or it was the rush of getting over a fear or something to that effect. But I took to it like a duck to water near somewhere. You shouldn't be exploring parts of the world that very few people see, relying on people truly relying on them to ensure your safety, and it's a rush, that's for certain, but it's not without its dangerous. So every year my family and a few close friends head out to a national park or something along those lines to spend some time with nature. And one particular year I managed to convince them to go out to Mammoth Cave National Park over in Kentucky, which is home to the more than 400 miles passageways, making it the world's largest known cave system. The cave system is located within the Green River Valley, and its winding chambers, pools, and limestone labyrinths are equal parts beautiful and eerie. 10 different tours offer guests the opportunity to explore the decorated historic and dripstone areas. The cave complex is especially well known for its natural entrance and Gothic Avenue, a passageway filled with historic stone monuments and signatures from 19th century visitors. So that was just about enough history and photo ops for my mom and aunts in the river, could provide hours of fishing from my dad and uncles. All the while myself and my cousin could enjoy the caving. There all went well with a vacation. Right up until the second to last day, when my cousin I decided to get a little too explorative during a visit to the caves. My cousin was fairly new to caving, so for the first few days, we didn't go too deep or too far. Last thing I wanted to do was freak him out before we'd even done anything worth writing home about. But as the week drew to a close, there was no way I was going home without finding something a little more extreme to traverse. So as we were heading back to civilization after an afternoon's caving, we found a slip just less than knee-high in the rock wall of a cavern. He had to get down in your stomach to fit into such a tight squeeze. But if you did, it led to a small crawl space that cut through the entire rock. After a few meters, I noticed that quartz was growing on the passageway ceiling, and in the light of our headlamps glittered in a way that I can't even really describe in words. I mean, it's like something out of a fairy tale, a steal from one of those weird Jim Henson movies. It's just magical. So we entered one at a time, given that the tunnel was only wide enough for one person. The old claustrophobic me would have thought this place was a living nightmare. For real, I'd have straight up had a panic attack and probably died of a heart attack before deprivation never set in. Every single time you took a breath in some places you'd feel the ceiling of the tunnel on your back. It was that narrow. But the new me just found it thrilling. Once you get it into your head that these things can't just up and collapse on you. You get this feeling of calm and then one of exhilaration when you realize you were conquering your fears and going places other men dared not tread. The deeper inside the tunnel we went, the more incredible the scenery became. It was like a whole other tiny world tucked away with a solid rock. But eventually, like most small subterranean tunnels, it just kind of petered out. At one turn there was a dead end. The other was host to all kinds of stalactites and stalagmites. Those are those like rock spike things that you usually see on the roofs of caves. Only you get them on the bottom too in most places. I'm checking out the styles to see if there's a possibility of us twisting through them to get to the deeper sections of the tunnel. When I hear my cousin whisper something behind me, something that honestly made my blood run cold. He said he could feel water on his back. Something was dripping on him. As it turns out, while everyone was having a good time outside, checking out the statues and whatnot, it had started to rain. Only they neglected the telesat, thanks guys. It's also worth noting that the tunnel we were in had sank down to the rock for a little while, but for sort of flattening out at the bottom. And to save you all a little geology lecture, I'll get to the point. The tunnel we were in was filling up with water. Granted, it was filling up slowly, but the position we were in meant that only a few inches of water could effectively drown us. And that's a real bad position to be in if you don't own a pair of gills. Needless to say, we turned around as fast as we could, which took like the longest time when you factor in how narrow the tunnel was, then begin the long slow crawl back along the flat part of the tunnel. It was absolutely horrific. I tried to keep calm and collected as I could, but hearing my cousin almost cracking up in front of me is something that still makes me shudder to think about. My biggest fear was that he just lock up, which scared people are prone to do during particularly grueling caving sessions. For some reason, the brain just decided doesn't want to take the body any further, and that's that they can be stuck in the rock for hours before they're calm enough to keep going. I was terrified he'd just lock up, not move, and be the reason we both drowned down there, dying while our family laughed and joked in their marquee tents. But he didn't. Magnificent idiot kept his cool, relatively speaking anyway, and just pushed on. That doesn't mean it didn't get pretty close. It was horrendous, feeling the water slowly rising around us. Seeing little drops turn into trickles, each new one causing my heart rate to speed up and my adrenaline surge. By the time the tunnel started to turn upward, back towards the main entrance, the water was almost up to my lips. Moving made the splashing noises, and both of our sets of clothes were completely soaked through. This little incident caused a ton of chaos for the remaining 2 days. My aunt and uncle blamed me for almost getting my cousin killed. And they pretty much took it out on my parents for allowing me such a dumb hobby. We didn't go back into those caves at all. And to be honest, it took me a few months before I even thought about caving again. It hasn't put me off entirely, and I think it did me some good to become a little more safety conscious. But you can bet that I check the weather before caving now, every single time. And if it even looks like it's going to rain, don't do it. It's just not worth losing your life over. No matter how amazing it is. So at my old high school there were these maintenance tunnels that snaked for hundreds of meters underneath the building itself. There were the newly built ones, and then there were the old ones that the school didn't use anymore. My friend Katie and I found an entrance to the old tunnels in a classroom that had long since been abandoned. We had to bust the lock on an old trapdoor, unscrew a round metal top layer, and lower ourselves into a square dirty tunnel. The main tunnels were about 2 feet wide by maybe only 6 feet tall, with maybe a few inches of dirty, stagnant water flooding the bottom. Now, these tunnels were very dark and very cold, with the utterly disgusting stench of stagnant water and old mold. It was gross, but we began exploring the tunnels a little more every day. One time, we were in there for maybe 20 minutes tops when Katie almost passed out from the smell. At least that's what I thought it was. Turns out that there was some dangerous gases down there. What I found out later were methane sinks that were actually pretty dangerous to those without safety equipment. I had to pretty much drag her out. But the next time we brought respiratory mask, waterproof footwear and flashlights, then set about mapping out pretty much the entire system. All in all, we mapped out more than 700 feet of twisting turning tunnels. It became something of an underground layer for us. They went down and turned to the sides. So much so we had to use chalk to mark the walls so we could find a way back. After a particularly long expedition, maybe like 3 hours, we headed back to where we came in, only to find the opening was actually locked. We pushed and turned on the metal cover, becoming pretty frightened when we found it wouldn't budge. We were basically trapped inside, and realizing that did not feel good at all. We pushed through the tunnels trying to open each of the 3 openings that we had found over time, but not a single one of them would open. Any panic that had been simmering away before had now bubbled to the surface, and to say the least, we were completely freaking out. We ended up rushing down a tunnel. We hadn't actually been down before, hoping it would lead us to an exit. After a while, I kept hearing noises behind us. I told Katie, who was crawling in front of me. We froze, turned off her flashlight, and listened. Sure enough, a steady splashing sound was actually following us. We just freaked out and just made a run for it. Now, please bear in mind, we had absolutely no idea where we were going at this point. It was just pure blind panic. After what felt like an hour of frenzy, dashing through the tunnels, tripping over pipes, and scraping our knees, we emerged into a bigger room. we realized that wasn't a room but sort of a down section of a much bigger room. As it turned out, there was someone doing maintenance down there with us. We hid behind some old metal stairs. And when the guy left for more tools, we scrambled up the stairs out the door and hid in the girls' locker rooms for the rest of the day. We never did find out who locked us down there, or what that splashing noise was. But you can bet we never went into those tunnels again. I've told this one before, but it's definitely worth retelling. Especially if I include a bit more detail. A long time ago, I happened to be on a visit to Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico with two of my college buddies. So this one particular small cave we decided to explore began with a narrow 15-meter belly crawl. At the open, there was a buttload of cobwebs spread across the cave entrance. But they seemed to clear up after a few feet. Pretty creepy, but generally nothing to worry about. Although I really hate that feeling of them when they touch your face, and there are a few dead flies in there, whatever. Anyway, I was the most experienced caver. So I went first and did the belly crawl pretty quickly, pretty much making myself the human shield for those big clumps of old cobwebs. As the tunnel ended, I came out in a small domed room about 1.5 meters tall and about 4 or 5 meters across. I had some time before my friends made it, so I was describing the room to them, whilst dusting the spider webs for my clothes. I looked up at the ceiling and gasped a bit. I'm not afraid of spiders. But the sheer volume of them caught me off guard and must have been a minimum of like 1,000 all crawling around each other. None of that, think about it. It was probably more like 2,000 or 3,000 all hanging from the ceiling with egg sacs all around them. I mean, they were legion. Like there wasn't a speck of rock ceiling to be seen as the entire thing. It was just a mass of 8-legged crawlies. Hey, guys, there's a lot of spiders hanging from the ceiling. Don't stand up when you get here. I called my friends. My friends were considerably more cautious of the spiders and began to ask a few questions about them. How big are they? What color they are? How many are there? That kind of thing? Oh, they're not that big. It kind of looks like black widows, but they're not the wrong color there. Almost seems like the brown lights look a little lighter than the body. I said, studying them as best as I could with my headlamp. I was no spider expert, but I knew a black widow when I saw one. But then a friend of mine who was a big animal expert at the time and actually went on to be a Wisconsin DNR warden yelled out, "Really? Do they have a small pattern on the back, sort of like a violin?" "Ah, yes," I replied, already getting a really bad feeling in my gut. Our buddy the DNR warden burst into the room, looked up, shuddered, then forced himself to look at one of the spiders as close as he could manage. The color in his face drained out, and he hissed, "Get out. Everyone get out of the cave." He didn't say any more. He just rushed to get out of the cave as quickly as he could. It took us all about 10 or 15 minutes to get into the room, and it took us about a whole 2 minutes to get all the way out of the cave. When we finally got out, the other two of us were confused. My warden friend told us that what we were looking at was a nest of brown recluse spiders, some of the more poisonous arachnids on the entire continent, and we had been unlucky enough to stumble across their lair. Apparently when they bite you, you go through excruciating pain for a few days, skin necrosis, and you could possibly die. We didn't go any more caves with cobwebs in them for the rest of the trip. I'm a qualified caving instructor, and honestly, it's not very often at all that I actually get frightened during a caving trip. Now, it's entirely possible that I've never gotten spooked, because I'm simply not claustrophobic. Nor am I afraid of the dark. I mean, asking someone who likes caving to describe really scary moments in a cave could, but if you ask people who hated caving, but were somehow roped into it anyway, what was scary about it, those stories might prove a little bit more fruitful. Having said that, there's definitely a few caving trips I've presided over that haven't exactly gone according to plan. I used to do a lot of solo caving, and rappelling down vertical caves was one of my favorite parts of the whole process. I must have dropped it into a cave, maybe 300 times or more. Last month, I took a small group of Boy Scouts from Michigan into a vertical cave. Being slightly out of practice and not trusting my well-worn gear to keep the kids safe, I ended up borrowing one from a buddy of mine. It was a slightly smaller bundle, slightly narrower in diameter, but it was infinitely more flexible than mine was. I thought this might prove to be a boon. But it turns out I didn't quite think this through. And problems that didn't occur to me at the time began to manifest quickly. Once I was in the cave itself, I figured out pretty quickly that I didn't have nearly the amount of control I was used to when rappelling. I found that I was able to stop, but only barely sitting over a 200-foot drop, while hardly being able to keep myself from sliding. I decided to abort the rappel at the first ledge I arrived at, which was about 30 feet down. I had to lock off my rack and call on those who came with me to help me swing over to the ledge and climb back out. Imagine that, having your life in the hands of a bunch of Boy Scouts. No offense, the little guys, they did the job. But I was pretty worried for a minute or two. I did have climbing gear with me, and I suppose it could have switched over to the other rack. But that would have been a lot more trouble. So I took the easy way out. No, not that one. Since I was able to lock off the rack, I could simply rest there and think about my situation. And the thoughts were not good. The Boy Scouts had their troop leader with them. So it wasn't like there wasn't a strong full adult there to add some extra pull. But I'll admit that I couldn't help but imagine what would have happened if something went wrong. If I were the panicking type, I suppose I would have been deathly afraid that I would lose my life right then and there. But that doesn't mean the prospect didn't make me feel extremely nervous. I was literally dangling like 30 foot into a pit with gear that wasn't right for the rope I was on, with absolutely no way to control my descent. The only thing is, I'm careful enough that when I decided that the rappel wasn't a sure thing, I chose to call its all entirely rather than risk that I'd have enough control to descend it safely. That's the type of care that keeps you alive in caves like that. But if you want to hear about something that really has the pucker factor, then how about a vertical cave with pull downs? You take your rope with you and an unexpected increase in water levels. There's a cave on Tennessee where there are 3 vertical drops of over 100 feet. But people typically only take one rope because the bottom of the cave is open, then you can pretty much walk out of it unless it's flooded. There is always water in the cave, anywhere from ankle deep to about 18 inches. Between the second and the third drop, there is a long 400-foot crawl away with low ceilings and high water levels. When I'm Ben, there was about half a foot of water with about the same amount of airspace above. It's a really nice crawl through with pretty river petals on the floor and lots of small but clean formations along the walls, white calcite formations, stalactites, stalagmites, and soda straws mostly. Some of the formations are beige, yellow, or tinged with red, showing impurities of course, which leads to a lot of vegetation during the 400-foot crawl. If, for example, Caver was in a small party who were exploring this particular cave and dropped into it expecting a typical through trip, but happened to have a problem during the second 200-foot rappel, the party could decide to float him through the crawl away and lower him down the final 100-foot rappel. They could pull down the rope and move him to where the entrance is. The crawl is only to discover that the water levels are too high. And there was a very small air gap in the crawl. But with water that high, the movement of the water would be very swift and then maybe too much for someone attempting to navigate it to fight their way back upstream. That person would have to contend with just a few inches of oxygenated air at the top of the passage that has razor-sharp rocks all along the cave ceiling. At the end of the passage, the water jets out over to a drop that's more than almost half a mile down. The immense water pressure would try to push them out of the passage. And it will take a great amount of strength and effort for a sustained period of time to be able to resist that water pressure. And honestly, it would not take long to exhaust someone. And when they run out of strength, and then it's time for the big asleep, it's likely that the fall would not kill the caver overnight, since the bottom of the drop would be completely flooded. He'd hit the bottom and in all likelihood, break a bone or sprained an ankle, but the water could essentially break his fall, potentially saving his life. But that's only assuming that he could breathe the whole way down the passage, without getting his face torn up by the rocks and the ceiling. And as you can imagine, that's very, very unlikely. If there's one thing you take away from this dumb story about caving, it's that you'd never, ever go alone. And generally speaking, you don't try to take an injured person out of the cave with small numbers. It's better to leave one person with the injured party and let 2 people go out and get help. That's why the smallest safe party is no less than about 4 people. But with 1 person staying back and 2 people trying to make it out of the flooded passage, there is the potential for lots of drama. I think I can give a good answer to this, as I've been caving as a hobby for several years now. Nothing really supernaturally creepy ever happened during any of my caving events. But I have been in some dangerous situations, which have either left me questioning my sanity, or the sanity of those around me. So I used to go caving with a group of people from a university club, but I've been out of university a few years and just been doing my own thing. Well, one weekend, me and my friend Josie decided we should go on a little trip to a cave with these guys, to see how the old club was doing, the club that taught us how to cave, and we in turn taught the new guys when we were the old breed. So anyway, the trip is going according to plan, and me and Josie go off caving on her own. But one evening, we decided to join the whole group and cave with them in a tunnel system near to our communal campsite. Now, at the time, it was raining a little and I was beginning to feel uneasy about the whole thing. But to be honest, I never voiced my concerns and just went with it. Big mistake. And so it was that a large group of 12 people arrive at this cave system, spending about 20 minutes checking their gear before entry. The particular cave system we were exploring is normally just a subterranean river on the inside. But it has a few levels of corridors that you can explore, high above the water itself. The entrance is really tight though, and requires you to climb down this tight pipe extremely cautiously, using only your feet to feel for stable footholds. There is absolutely no way to see what is below you. And basically, if you lose your footing, there was a nasty fall that could leave you seriously injured if you fell victim to it. However, manage to keep your head together and you'll be fine. So much of caving is winning the battle in your own mind. So anyways, we get to the cave and the guys in the club are doing their thing. Me and Josie are just the old salty veterans, coming along to relive the old college days. Once we're inside, we realized that there was this one younger girl who's got herself somehow stuck in the entrance at the very rear of the group. Turns out there was only her second caving trip ever, and for some reason, her buddies thought it would be a good idea to bring her into the Swan, even though she had panicked whilst in a much larger, easier cave system earlier in the week. So one of the team leaders stays behind to help the panicking girl calm down and to get her to advance further into the cave, while the rest of us move deeper down some of the long corridors before we can start exploring the cave properly. Then I went and asked one of the leaders of the group, a girl who had taught how to cave just a few years before, what time it was. And to my absolute shock and horror, she straight up tells me that she doesn't know because she's not wearing a watch. Shocked, I asked her how she expects to know what time to leave the cave to be on time for the call out. For those that don't know, the call out is arguably the most important aspect of serious caving. It's where you let someone on the surface know, even if it's just a friend who's not even on the trip, exactly who is going to be present on a caving trip, as well as what time you plan on leaving. Without a call out, if something goes wrong, no one will know you are missing for days or even weeks, and will then have potentially hundreds of cases to look over in the hopes of finding you. And in that time, it's entirely possible that you could have died of deprivation by that point. Remember, it takes just around 72 hours without water for a person's heart to just pack up and cease beating. Anyway, the leader of all these sweet innocent beginners tells me that she did not leave a call out or bring any first aid kit or safety equipment. I'm literally furious that she's put us in this situation. But I hold my cool long enough because I don't want the others to panic. Because the panic in a cave system is a straight up death sentence on occasion. But still, I tell her quietly that I am now the call out and toe ban of the cave by 1:30 p.m. I reluctantly give her my watch, trying not to snap, and straight up call her reckless and dumb before I start back towards the cave entrance. Back near the entranceway, the other leader guy was sitting with a girl who got stuck earlier, the same one who managed to get her into the cave. Turns out she just couldn't handle it and they'd abandoned the attempt entirely. I go through the situation with them and tell them I'm leaving the cave to be the call-out guy. They asked me to go get an SRT kit. Basically, just ropes and harness, in case any of the other caving clubs needed it to climb back up. So I do just that. A little while later I head back with gear, which they didn't have all of and I had to borrow off of other cavers who were luckily at the same campsite. I get back to the cave and the others are leaving, albeit rather slowly as it is a difficult entrance, and climbing out is incredibly harder than climbing in. They all manage to get out, but lo and behold, the panicking girl gets stuck in with the two leaders trapped below her. She is blocking the entrance. We harness her up and I've rigged up an anchor to try and secure her on a rope in case she falls. But she is wedged in there tight and it isn't in the right frame of mind to get moving. Then I get the news from the others below that the cave is starting to fill because of rain. After what seems like eternity of them nicely talking to this panicking girl, telling her that she's doing great and she'll be fine. She's getting worse at this stage. I freak out. I shout at her that she needs to get herself together and get out of the cave because two others are stuck behind her. It kind of works and she nearly stops having a panic attack. Not entirely, but stops hyperventilating, which just makes her more stuck. She still won't climb out though. So against all common sense, I lie down into the hole and grab her by the harness and pull her up and out of the cave. After that, I told the club that they needed to get their stuff together and stop being cowboys, but I haven't gotten back to them since because their foolishness straight up nearly got two team leaders killed.